coming on the air tonight with our teams out on the campaign trails ahead of polls closing in New York and Florida in the next few hours, with voters deciding on some key races that could shape what happens come November. We're going to explain why, especially when it comes to one particular bellwether district, plus what the candidates and voters are telling our teams. And a verdict in the trial for two men accused of plotting to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. A jury finding them guilty today, how the governor is responding, and the message the whole thing sends. Plus, a cybersecurity veteran blowing the whistle on Twitter, accusing the company of big security flaws and lying about them to the government. You're not going to be surprised to hear that lawmakers are now demanding an investigation. We're going to take you live to Capitol Hill. Then, in our original tonight, why some companies are cutting back on parental leave benefits, even when there seems to be more focus than ever on giving new moms and dads the time they need with their newborns. Why it's happening and what one employee is telling us tonight. And get ready to get a little freaked out with NASA revealing what it might sound like if you happen to be positioned next to a black hole. We'll talk about why the internet is calling this the soundtrack of your nightmares a little later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and in just a few hours, polls in Florida, New York, and Oklahoma will close, and it's a little bit of everything for everyone tonight. You've got a fight between two powerful Democrats, a race to decide who'll take on a controversial governor at the center of 2024 talk, and possibly a clue about how each party might need to fine-tune their messaging come November. Now, in two of these states we're looking at, Florida and New York, the focus is on two big topics, abortion and the economy. Democrats mostly putting abortion rights front and center right now, and Republicans largely turning this year's midterms into a referendum on the economy and on how the Biden administration has handled inflation. A special election tonight could give us a sense of how each party's strategy is working so far as it relates to November, with the Democratic majority in both chambers of Congress hanging in the balance. You see the graphic on screen. You will see it a lot over the next 80-plus days here. The Senate and the House of Representatives. I want to bring in Dasha Burns, who's in New York, Shaq Brewster, who's in Florida. Dasha, let me start with you. And the special congressional election in New York, right? Not in New York City, but closer to Rochester, where you're seeing kind of this preview of both parties' midterm strategies. And this race is a little bit of the canary in the coal mine, I think, to some political observers about how the strategy for each party might work come November.
Yeah, Hallie, I didn't necessarily think that I would be up in the Hudson Valley of New York hunting for clues about where the political headwinds are headed ahead of November. But that is what we are doing because this is such a significant race for that exact reason. Look, this is a pretty swingy district. It went Obama to Trump to Biden. But more importantly is the messaging that we're looking at from both the Democratic and the Republican candidate here. And just to remind our viewers, because we've been talking a lot about primaries today, this is not a primary race. This is a special election. This is a congressional race, and it is the first competitive congressional race since the fall of Roe, and it might be the last bellwether that we get ahead of November. So what's really fascinating here, Hallie, is that it could answer the question of which message might win out, which message might get more voters to the polls. Is it the Republican messaging on Biden's low popularity, the painful inflation that so many folks are dealing with, or is it the abortion issue that Democrats really hope will galvanize the base and even potentially get some Republicans to turn out and vote for Democrats in November? And these two candidates here, Democrat Pat Ryan has made abortion the centerpiece of his campaign. I mean, his campaign signs literally say choice is on the ballot. And the Republican candidate, Mark Molinaro, focusing on those kitchen table pocketbook issues, talking about the challenges that folks are facing with gas prices, with grocery prices. I want you to take a listen to my conversations with both of these candidates and pay attention to the messaging here, because, again, I think this is going to give some insight as to what we're going to be hearing for the next couple of months leading up to the midterms.
We have fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right for a woman to have access to safe abortion, to have reproductive rights being ripped away. I'm a West Point grad, an Army veteran. I risk my life to defend all freedoms for all people, including the right to choose.
The issue of confronting cost, making ends meet, is what consumes the voters and the residents and the families of this. I know, and I lived on food stamps as a kid. The anxiety I see in the families across this district is the same anxiety I saw on my mother's face.
Molinaro has taken a somewhat different tack than some of his Republican colleagues on abortion. He does not oppose the right to abortion, doesn't want to necessarily roll back those rights, but he has downplayed it as an issue here in the state of New York, saying, look, it's protected here. Voters don't need to worry about it in the same way that they do in other states. But I'll tell you, as I've been talking to voters here, at least anecdotally, I'll say the first thing that I'm hearing as they come out of the voting booth is Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court decision is really top of mind, despite the fact that they live in New York State. They're worried about other states. They're worried about nationally, and they're worried about what could happen in the future, depending on who holds power in Congress and in the White House, Hallie.
And then talk a little bit more about this Carolyn Maloney, Jerry Nadler race, Sasha, because that's getting a lot of attention, too.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a friends to frenemies kind of race. I mean, either way, this is a tough one for Democrats. You know, the overarching theme really of these New York races is redistricting and how much it has squished districts, created entirely new districts, and led to some confusion for voters, but also pitted against one another two longtime Democrats who will see one of their careers will end tonight. We are going to see a pretty tight race here, I think. But from what we're looking at, the third candidate who has talked about turning the page on 1992, he has run against Maloney multiple times, and it's possible that he'll pull a little bit more from her. But we'll see. This is going to be a tough one, though, for Democrats in D.C., regardless of which way it goes, Hallie.
Dasha Burns, thank you very much. Shaq Brewster, let me turn to you, my friend, down in Florida, because the marquee race there, the governor's race, top two candidates set to potentially, one of them will take on Ron DeSantis, the current governor, Nikki Fried, Charlie Crist. You've got Charlie Crist, you know, who's switched parties, outspending Fried on the airwaves. But Fried is casting herself as a different kind of candidate as it relates to abortion access. And I think Democrats are looking at, hey, who could take on Ron DeSantis? Obviously, the controversial Florida governor, popular inside the party, very much so, speculated about to be running in 2024 for president potentially.
Exactly, Hallie. And, you know, that has been the focus from the candidates as they've been making their pitch to voters. But here at this polling location, I've also been hearing voters frame it in that same way. You know, one thing that we hear, Charlie Crist, he says he's done the job before. He was a Republican governor. He secured the endorsement of Democratic officials here. He says it's experience that can help him over the finish line if he wins the nomination. And then Nikki Fried saying, hey, I'm someone new. I'm something new. You should come with me because I will excite the Democratic base. I've been a lifelong Democrat, and I'll help win over suburban women, especially in light of the overturning of Roe. That is the similar message that I've been hearing from voters as they decided which candidate to choose. I want you to listen to my conversations with two voters who supported Crist in this election, but listen because you'll hear how it's not about the policy distinctions between these two candidates. Instead, it's about something else.
I was remembering Charlie Crist. Okay, he was okay. I know him, so I said, you know what, that's where I'm going again.
I voted for Charlie Crist.
Why?
Because I think he stands a greater chance of beating our current governor.
That's your priority?
Yes.
I did speak to someone who voted for Fried, who said she has been always on our side with these issues. She liked the idea that Fried was taking the abortion mantle and running with that and talking about how she was going to protect women's rights. But you get an idea of how, for so many voters and the candidates, it's about that battle in November rather than the election that we're watching today.
And look ahead to November because DeSantis has cash. He's got money. He's got a war chest, right? He's well known. He's got a ton of name recognition. This is going to be a fight.
Without a doubt, Hallie, and you're already getting a preview of how these Democratic candidates, whichever one ultimately wins this primary, how they think they will take on Ron DeSantis. Both of them agree that they say abortion is something that gives them an advantage. It's something that can animate their voters, especially in a state like Florida, where there was a ban on abortions passed after 15 weeks. But it's not just abortion here in Florida. Voters have come up and talked to me about education issues. We talked about how education here in Florida has had that cross-section where it's not just about the classroom, but You're hearing a lot of the social issues get involved, the restrictions coming from the state level on how race, how sexuality can be discussed in the classroom. You're hearing voters mentioning that and saying that is something that will drive them to the polls. And we talk about inflation across the country, but unique to Florida is the rise in prices, specifically with rent prices. Those are openings that these Democratic candidates are saying they may have against DeSantis. So although they're behind in polling right now, although they're behind in fundraising, certainly with that war chest that DeSantis has, they believe there's an opening there because of those other outstanding issues, Hallie.
Shaq Brewster live for us in Pompano Beach. Shaq, thank you. The National Archives today giving us an idea, new now tonight, of just how sensitive and how many classified documents former President Trump had at Mar-a-Lago. We're seeing this new letter from the agency that was sent to the former president's lawyers in May, saying there were more than 700 pages of classified material, including some of the government's most sensitive secrets, in boxes that Trump lawyers initially turned over in January. And the New York Times is reporting they've gotten more since then. Multiple people briefed say the government has recovered more than 300 documents additional, right, with classified markings from Mr. Trump since he left office. So if you're like, okay, Hallie, break down the timeline, help me understand it. Boy, you should screenshot this right here, right, because this is how it all went down. A few weeks after the National Archives first got the first set of documents, right, back in January, documents with classified markings, it asked the Department of Justice to take a closer look. By the spring, the DOJ had subpoenaed Mr. Trump for missing documents. Then in early June, the FBI and DOJ officials met with attorneys at Mar-a-Lago. The former president was there, showed up, said hi, apparently. A few days later, the DOJ requested Trump staff secure a room with these documents in them, right? They didn't want them just anywhere. They wanted them in some place that was fairly secure so folks randomly couldn't just pop in and out and stick their hands all over it. By August 5th, the Justice Department applied for a warrant to get the docs, which then led to the FBI search August 8th. NBC News has reached out to the DOJ, the FBI, the Trump team for comment. We haven't heard back. Ken Delanian joins us now. So, Ken, help. The newest thing here, right, is the understanding from the National Archives, the confirmation from the archives itself that there was a lot of sensitive stuff that was in Mr. Trump's possession, but they didn't get this warrant to go search Mar-a-Lago until August, yes?
Yes. I mean, we knew that they had found classified documents in the 15 boxes that they turned over in January. What's new today is that these documents included some of the most highly classified documents that the U.S. government has. Sensitive compartmented information, special access programs. These are the most esoteric intelligence programs, the kind that the disclosure of which can really compromise U.S. national security, even get people killed. So it just tells me that the government would have been really, really concerned from the jump there as soon as they learned that. And yet it wasn't until obviously August that they went and executed the search warrant. And we know there were a lot of steps in between because the Trump lawyers have also acknowledged in this lawsuit that Donald Trump has filed that they were served a grand jury subpoena. Then the Justice Department came down and visited them. Then they got another grand jury subpoena for surveillance video. And only then did the search warrant happen. And it's really clear from the tone of this letter that the archives released that the Trump lawyers were resisting. They didn't even want the archives to show this stuff to the FBI. Apparently, the archives had to get the former president's permission to show it to the FBI. And that was part of what this letter was about. But clearly, the letter also says, there already was a criminal investigation ongoing as of April, May when this letter was written, and the Justice Department was taking it very, very seriously. When you look at this timeline now, Hallie, some people may even ask, what took the DOJ so long? They waited an awfully long time after knowing there were sensitive compartmented information in a basement at a golf and swim club in Florida.
Sources told the New York Times that investigators want more surveillance video from Mar-a-Lago, right? Why? Is this to try to determine who else may have been in and out of this room where the documents were held?
That is certainly what my sources believe, because one of the questions here, we know there was unauthorized possession of classified information. Was there unauthorized disclosure? So they're going to want to know who touched this stuff. Who were they? Where did they go after the fact? They're going to want to know everything about everybody who was anywhere near these documents because they contain devastating secrets. Now, it's bad enough if they were just sitting there. It's much worse if they got into the wrong hands. And it's not clear that the FBI has determined whether they got into the wrong hands, but that's certainly what they're trying to find out.
Ken Delanian, good to see you. Thank you, as always. I know you're working the phones basically constantly. Appreciate it. To Michigan now, where just this afternoon, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer is saying it's time we take a closer look at the state of our politics right now, after two men were found guilty for plotting to kidnap her. Whitmer saying plots against public officials and threats to the FBI are a disturbing extension of radicalized domestic terrorism that festers in our nation. This is after a federal jury officially found Barry Croft and Adam Fox guilty. The case brought to trial a second time, basically giving prosecutors a kind of do-over after a jury earlier this year said they wouldn't convict them. These two could now be facing life in prison. Prosecutors say they were part of a bigger group of people who were mad over COVID restrictions, who plotted ways to try to overthrow people they saw as tyrants in the government. These two chose Whitmer as a target, coming up with a plan to kidnap her at her family's vacation home. Danny Savalas is joining us now. And Danny, this comes at a time, look, listen, this is an intense political moment for the country. We're going to talk more about violent threats in a second. But you had, Whitmer blaming then President Trump for his rhetoric of being against early COVID restrictions. There was anger, et cetera. Now this guilty verdict seems intended by the jury to send a message given the landscape we're in.
10 years ago, the idea that the president made me do it would even be a concept in American criminal law would have been insane. But, and although that certainly wasn't the defense that these defendants mounted, certainly overall, the overall picture of Trump activity and then the resulting violence is a cause for concern. But in this case, the defendants had a rather solid defense, as evidenced by the fact that they had already had a hung jury in a prior trial, and their co-defendants were acquitted. And that defense essentially was built on a kind of entrapment, that essentially these guys were just tough talkers, and it was the government that substituted that criminal will by being too aggressive with their undercover activities with this sting operation. And so the government took on a big risk retrying these defendants, but as is usually the case statistically in federal court, the government prevailed.
The increased sort of anger that we've seen now in politics at this moment is disproportionately targeting female elected officials, especially women of color. I saw you searching for, I think, your microphone, Danny. I don't know if you're still with us, so let me just take a peek. You are.
I was trying to do it on the sly.
Live TV, man. It's okay. It fell off your lapel. We'll put it back on. Now we can actually hear you as you talk about this moment and this verdict and what it means for women specifically deciding whether or not to run for office.
It should not, I would hope, dissuade anyone, women, men, anybody from running for office. But unfortunately, running for office has always been something that puts you in the public eye. If the public eye increasingly means that you might be subjected to violence, then there's no question it would have a chilling effect, which is why the government has to really prosecute these cases when it finds them. But also be careful, as in all cases, to not substitute its will, to be too aggressive in sting operations and create the crime rather than prevent, stop, or punish the crime. And I have a confession. The mic didn't fall off. I actually forgot to put it on in the first place.
Danny Savalas, I was going to put you under a lie detector, so thank you. Thank you for coming clean. I appreciate it. It's always good to see you, confessions and all, friend. Appreciate it. We've got some developing news, too, as it relates to this idea of violent threats in the world of politics. The IRS commissioner tonight now calling for a safety and security review after a series of threats, he says, against the IRS and its employees. In a letter sent to agency staffers obtained by NBC News, Commissioner Chuck Rettig points to what he describes as an abundance of misinformation and false social media postings, saying that the safety and security of the agency is important to him, pledging to make every effort to dispel any lingering misperceptions about our work. Many Republicans have criticized the IRS after the agency got new funding as part of that sweeping climate and health care law President Biden recently signed. We're going to stay on top of those updates on that IRS safety review and bring them to you as we get them. Down in Atlanta now, the police officers there involved in the shooting death of Rayshard Brooks will not face criminal charges. A special prosecutor saying today that these two officers did not commit a crime and that their use of deadly force was reasonable. Remember, the death of Brooks, the shooting death of Brooks was a huge story. It happened outside of Wendy's back in 2020 in June, just about 3 weeks after the murder of George Floyd. And it came at this time of a national reckoning over police use of force, over race and justice. That Wendy's, you're seeing it, went up in flames. Rest in peace, Rayshard was spray painted on public signs. Joining me now is Guad Venegas. Guad, talk to us about how the prosecutor came to this decision, because he laid out in sort of a lengthy discussion the rationale here.
Hallie, that is correct. As we looked at these photos of what happened after this incident, Well, there was a press conference where they announced that no charges would be brought forward. They have since shared some more information as to how they investigated this incident. It's been more than 2 years since this happened, and the special prosecutor worked on this case. So what they're saying is that they looked at expert analysis, they looked at witness statements, videos, audio. All of these factors contributed to the decision that had been announced today. Now, the information that's been shared today also reports that there was 40 minutes of interaction between Brooks and these two officers that they say was cordial and uneventful before the violent interaction began, and as we know, would end with the killing of Rayshard Brooks. This decision announcing that there will be no charges for these officers comes after all of these videos went viral. There was the unrest that we saw, that the restaurant was burned down. And now, after they've had all this time with the special prosecutor to make this announcement, I should add that the mayor of Atlanta has also sent out a release saying he respects the independent role that the prosecutor played in this case. Also, Atlanta police, Hallie, has announced that these two officers are employed by the department. They've been on administrative duties, and they're informing that they will go through additional training as they move forward, Hallie.
Guad Venegas, thank you very much for that reporting. I appreciate it. In other news tonight, Texas Governor Greg Abbott is announcing just this afternoon he is signing a disaster declaration to help 23 counties affected by big flooding across the state, saying that Texas got hit in this sort of historic fashion, right? You saw some places with more than 15 inches of rain, streets becoming rivers, more than 100 homes damaged. In Dallas County, officials also declared a state of disaster. The flooding there turning deadly, killing one person, a 60-year-old woman whose car got swept away. Then you've got what's happening in Arizona, where people had to evacuate their homes in Duncan. Water levels in one of those rivers got so high that it basically overspilled a levee, started spilling into the town. The storm is moving east now, and tonight you have about 4 million people under flood watches again from East Texas through Louisiana and into central Mississippi. Jay Gray is there on the ground in Shreveport, Louisiana, and they're sort of waiting at this moment, Jay, to see how bad the storm's going to be. After in Texas, we saw how bad it was, with Governor Abbott saying basically the state emergency management people have to up their readiness level.
Yeah, absolutely, Hallie. Overwhelming in Texas here. A wait and see. We're getting a spitting rain right now. Nothing severe and not near what it could have been to this point overnight. And yesterday, they did have significant rain, which reduced the water deficit from the drought by 70%. So that's how much rain they got here in Shreveport. Nowhere near what they got in Dallas and across North Texas. You're right. The governor spoke today, said the worst flooding since 1932 in the Dallas region. One person died, unfortunately. An Uber driver who had just dropped off her passenger was on the phone with her family when her vehicle was swept away by the water. We know that more than 100 homes were damaged. They're getting a few spots of rain today, but today's more a day of cleanup that's going to take some time. And those declarations you talk about, Hallie, are going to bring some money into that area, hopefully some federal money as well to help those families that have been displaced and those that have to now clean things out and move forward. And moving forward is going to be very difficult. There's also going to be the chance for more rain in the Texas area, Central Texas, Austin now in the spotlight, though it looks like it won't be anywhere as bad as it was in Dallas. And frankly, it couldn't have been much worse in the Dallas area.
And the crazy thing about this, too, Jay, is that in a lot of these places, we've been talking about the drought, right? The fact that there was no rain. So, like, yes, these spots wanted water, but this is so intense. It was so overwhelming. And it is whiplash, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I do. I think it's overwhelming. I think a lot of people look at this and say, you know, we've been struggling with this for about 100 days, no real precipitation, excessive heat, and now we get all of this in once. And what does it do? It doesn't end the drought for Texas, obviously. There are areas that didn't see rain yesterday. It's a big state. But what it did do was at least end the surface drought in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. What's that mean? That means it took care of the lakes and the other reservoirs and got them out of the drought level possible, but there's got to be a soaking rain, and that didn't happen yesterday. It came so fast, and there was so much that it spread out and moved into areas where it wasn't supposed to be. So it didn't get down and into the inner layer of the soil, and I've studied up on this. It looks like they will need soaking rains to end that portion of the drought. So is it good news? In a sense, yes. Was it worth it? I think most in Dallas-Fort Worth will tell you no.
Yeah, absolutely not. Jay Gray, thank you for that. That was a great explanation. It's always good to see you.
Thanks.
Please stay safe. Appreciate it. We've got some breaking news into us here for the more than 45 million Americans who have student loan debt. Just coming into us as we've been on the air, 3 sources are telling our team at NBC News that tomorrow at the White House, President Biden will make an announcement canceling $10,000 in federal student loans at the White House for people making less than $125,000 a year. Student loan repayments have been on pause since the start of the pandemic, remember, in March of 2020. Sources tell NBC News that the president will extend that pause several more months, too. So if you're looking at your monthly budget for September and October, you don't have to account, right, for that student loan payment just yet. Still, that's not enough for some borrowers that we talk to here on this show. Watch.
Something is better than nothing. Of course, I wish it was more, but that is definitely a move in the right direction.
A move in the right direction. Let me bring in Maura Barrett, who is joining us now from Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, where President Biden has been on a bit of a vacation. We know the presidents are always working, and it sounds like he will be back tomorrow at the White House, Maura, based on the reporting from our White House and Hill colleagues. And he will make this announcement. Presumably, he'll have advocates behind him, I would think. Talk to us about what we know and what we can expect.
Well, a lot of details still up in the air about what exactly this event will look like. But we do know that it'll be at the White House and obviously coming on the heels of the president closing out his vacation here in Rehoboth Beach. You'll remember he took a bit of a break from his vacation to go and sign the Inflation Reduction Act into law. And there's a lot of speculation on how the forgiveness of some student loan debt, that up to $10,000 for borrowers that make less than $125,000, how that could play into the overall picture for inflation. There's concern across the political spectrum where people are concerned that if borrowers are able to spend more money and drive up inflation, that could negate the benefits that we've gotten from the Inflation Reduction Act. The Government Accountability Office notes that over the last 2 years, because of this pause on the student debt relief program, it's cost the government about more than $100 billion in interest payments because the borrowers haven't had to pay their actual debt, but they also haven't been paying interest. And so this is definitely something that the White House has been focusing on, especially because they're coming up on this deadline of August 31st to extend that moratorium. And it was a campaign promise the president made on the 2020 trail, but there's a lot of unbalance over who will be actually celebrating this versus how much impact it'll have on the economy, Hallie.
We talked with Tanya Edmonds today. She has more than $100,000 in student loan debt from grad school. She told one of our producers here on the show how this is affecting her. I want you to listen.
It's a real hindrance for me to be able to move on with my life. I can't buy a house. I can't, make any big purchases at this point without going into more serious debt.
There's been a lot of debate of whether, is $10,000 enough? How did the administration get to this number?
Well, Hallie, I think you ask anybody in any of your circles, or at least in my circles, and I know a lot of our colleagues, it's hard to find anybody that doesn't have any student debt, right? And so there's the argument that a little bit can help, but when you meet people like Tonya, like that, $100,000 is a big chunk of money that does set you back. Now, activists have been pushing, Democratic activists and lawmakers have been pushing the president to up the relief to up to $50,000. The president has said in the past that he would not get to that number again because it's about achieving that balance. Now, according to the latest data from the Education Department, that $10,000 number will settle the balances of roughly a third of those borrowers that you highlighted earlier and cut total debt by at least half for another 20%. And so that will have an impact for anybody that does make less than $125,000 a year that does have some of that student debt. But obviously a lot of contention between how you got to that number. We know that the president's chief of staff, Ron Klain, was on the phone with Democratic lawmakers like Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, Raphael Warnock, who are all big advocates advocates of student debt relief, urging them to do as much as they can on their ends, too. So this might not be the end of the road on student debt relief right now, but obviously a welcome event tomorrow at the White House for a lot of the people that voted for Joe Biden on this key issue.
Maura Barrett, thank you much. I know we will be covering that on the show here tomorrow night, too. Appreciate it. Coming up, lawmakers say they will be looking into these big new allegations, explosive ones, being made by Twitter's former head of cybersecurity. The concerns this whistleblower wants you to know about. And some maybe not so awesome news about the trees in this country, the threats that 1 in 6 tree species are facing. Lawmakers tonight are demanding investigations into explosive allegations made by Twitter's former head of cybersecurity, Peter Zatko, nicknamed Mudge, who's accusing Twitter of egregious security flaws. In a whistleblower complaint that NBC News has now obtained, he says Twitter hasn't complied with the deal it made with the FTC to protect people's personal information, that members of the board of directors misled the public, even misled the government about company security. He also claims thousands of employees have way too much access to core company software, which led to some high-profile hacks, like the time a teenager got into verified accounts of celebrities, even former presidents. He also says Twitter doesn't do enough to accurately detect bots on the platform, and that's where Elon Musk comes in. He's trying to get out of his deal to buy Twitter for more than $44 billion. One of his reasons is, he says, Twitter understates the number of bots on the platform. Twitter obviously on defense on all of this. The company fired Zatko in January and now says his claims are, in their words, a false narrative riddled with inconsistencies and inaccuracies. NBC News reached out to Zatko for comment, but no response, at least not immediately. Gabe Gutierrez joins us now. And Gabe, let's start with the sort of D.C. piece of this, right? Because we're seeing Congress move like this on this complaint, this explosive whistleblower complaint that basically says Twitter misled the government, right? Talk about the significance, big picture here.
Well, Hallie, it is quite a big picture, right? Twitter with more than 238 million daily users, and these allegations are just stunning from, a person, Zatko, who you mentioned is very well known in cybersecurity circles. He's, known as Mudge. He's a respected hacker, a so-called ethical hacker, but, he's testified in front of Congress, dating back to 1998 in the early days of the internet. So with these allegations, you laid them out very nicely there. But basically, he's alleging that Twitter did not do enough to protect the sensitive user data, from millions of users, and basically alleged that, Twitter did not reliably protect, have any serious security plan in place, Hallie.
A couple of things here, Gabe, because you mentioned, this guy. The reason he has a nickname, Mudge, is because he is kind of such a big deal in the cybersecurity world. Talk about that a little bit. And then the Elon Musk factor, which I think people find interesting. The timing here. This is coming just weeks before Twitter is set to go to trial with Musk, who's looking to get out of this deal. Part of Musk's concern, as we said, relates to bots. He's been tweeting about this whistleblower complaint today.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. You see there on your screen one tweet from Elon Musk today saying spam prevalence was shared with the board, but the board chose not to disclose it. Basically, and he also tweeted a picture there of, I believe that's Jiminy Cricket.
Jiminy
from,
Cricket,
Pinocchio.
teaching
Yeah.
Pinocchio how to whistle.
Elon Musk.
Eloning.
Being, yeah, exactly. But that second tweet, he, posted part of the Washington Post story. Look, Elon Musk, and I'm no lawyer here with that disclaimer, his legal team will almost certainly be looking at this and taking some of these allegations and raising questions about whether Twitter has been not just forthcoming with the public, but forthcoming, with his own attorneys as this deal is moving forward. And yes, as part of this whistleblower complaint, the allegations stem that Twitter kind of gave these misleading statements, according to the complaint, kind of downplaying the amount of bots that, and, false accounts, essentially, that are located on its platform. So, Twitter, as you said, they are calling this complaint filled with inaccuracies. We actually didn't speak with the whistleblower himself, but we spoke with his attorney late this afternoon, who says, that he came, couldn't talk about too many details, but basically that he felt compelled to do this, that it was he felt ethically he had to come forward and do this after he was fired, because in his what he was trying to do was bring some of these things to light, and he felt that it fell on deaf ears. When he tried to bring them up to the authorities at Twitter. And so now, as you said, Hallie, several bipartisan leaders of several congressional committees here now say they will investigate this. And it should be interesting to see how this moves forward as the legal battle plays out with Elon Musk as well.
Gabe Gutierrez, thank you very much. Appreciate that breakdown for us of this very much a buzzy story tonight. Thanks. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1. Another journalist has been killed in Mexico, the 15th journalist to be killed in that country so far this year. He ran an online local news program that focused a lot on state-level politics before he was shot to death in southern Mexico. The country is now considered one of the most dangerous places for journalists outside a war zone. Number 2, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, has pleaded guilty to DUI charges after a crash in California. He was sentenced to 5 days in jail and 3 years of probation. But he may not have to serve any more time behind bars since he's already been there 2 days and got 2 more days of credit. Officials say Pelosi will likely serve the last day in a court-approved work program. Number 3, teachers in Ohio's biggest school district went on strike. They're now on strike 2 days before the start of the school year. It's the first time in nearly 50 years that this has happened. These public school teachers want smaller class sizes. They want air conditioning in every school. Classes are set to start tomorrow, so the district is scrambling to find substitutes. Number 4, as many as 1 in 6 U.S. tree species is being threatened with extinction, according to some new research. Some 100 native species could die out because of things like invasive bugs, more deadly diseases. Climate change is a biggie, too. This study is the first to assess the health of all the 881 tree species native to the U.S. Number 5, more than 280,000 Hyundai and Kia vehicles are being recalled because of concerns they could catch on fire if they're parked inside. There have been 25 such reports of these fire or melting incidents in the U.S. and Canada. No crashes, no injuries, but the automaker is telling owners to park their vehicles outside, park them away from buildings. So something to watch if you own one of those brands. Coming up, what some describe as a disturbing new trend with companies now cutting back on benefits for new parents. That's tonight's original. And some pretty scary moments for people on an Alaska Airlines plane. The engine cover, yikes, look at that, totally ripped off. We're talking about what happened in the local tonight. So tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. And today it's about parental leave, which for the most part, over the last 15 or so years, has been something that employers have offered. They've expanded. They have given people benefits, right? Working parents who just have a kid, they get benefits. They get to go away from their jobs, be at home, and get paid for that, right? And in the years leading up to the pandemic, when companies were facing worker shortages, many companies stepped up and maternity and paternity paid time off in a bid to try to bring in strong performers. But here's the thing now. New data is showing a reversal of that trend. As the Wall Street Journal has reported, a recent survey of some 3,000 employers by the Society for Human Resource Management found some companies are cutting back now on paid parental leave for their employees, leaving some potential new parents rethinking their plans. Watch. Devin Ritchie dreams about becoming a father.
I've always wanted to be a dad, but as things are right now, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
He's a Texas-based customer service rep with Hulu, a streaming service owned by the Walt Disney Company. He tells NBC Hulu recently cut its fully paid parental leave benefits from 20 weeks down to 8 weeks.
For a company like Disney to really pull back on something like 20 weeks is just kind of crazy.
Hulu declined to comment, but it comes as many companies are now cutting paid parental leave. 35% of employers now offer paid maternity leave beyond what's required by law, but that's down from 53% in 2020, according to a new survey by the Society for Human Resource Management. Paternity leave fell from 44% in 2020 to 27% in 2022 also.
I really was surprised at the result. It almost was a little counterintuitive counterintuitive. We're in the middle of a war for talent, and we know that employees value this benefit. So a lot of companies have said, we're going to hunker down. We're going to take some proactive steps to reduce our expense line so that we can successfully not only survive, but thrive on the other side of whatever economic recession were to take place.
Only 11 states and Washington, D.C. have laws that require most employers to offer some paid leave to new parents. The other 39 states do not. U.S. federal law lets qualifying workers take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave after their child is born, but not getting paid is just not feasible for many employees.
I honestly don't want to be in a situation where I'm going to have to make a decision between, having a kid or being able to eat next week.
The amount of companies offering parental leave benefits over the past 15 years has mostly increased, with a drop during the 2008 and 2009 economic crisis. In fact, the SHRM study shows that compared to 2007, nearly twice as many companies surveyed offered paid maternity leave. But during the pandemic, that was almost tripled.
You have employees that have been in a very powerful position with lots of options in terms of their work, and their priorities have shifted. And then you have many employers who are now wanting to transition back toward pre-pandemic systems and costs and benefits. And there's going to be a tug of war that's going to shake out, and we're going to be watching that happen.
But for some workers who may be finding their leave cut back, finding a company with competitive leave benefits is top of mind.
Companies really need to start appreciating their workers more, because they're going to start losing a lot of hardworking people over things like this.
Another number worth noting from this survey, 82% of people, so the vast majority of people, say leave benefits are very or extremely important. This is a close second to health-related benefits at 88%. But here's the thing. People want their leave. People need it. We're keeping an eye on that story as it develops, too. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Midwest Bureau, former Louisville detective Kelly Goodlett pleaded guilty today to a federal charge in connection to the shooting of Breonna Taylor. She admitted she helped falsify a search warrant of Taylor's apartment and then helped cover it up. This marks the first conviction in the 2020 raid that led to Taylor's death. From the West Coast Bureau, this may not be what you want to see out of your window on a plane, right? An Alaska Airlines flight making an emergency landing after this engine cover detaches. The airline in a statement said the flight reported an unusual vibration after departure and turned back around. It had taken off from Seattle and was bound for San Diego. Luckily, you see this? Nobody was hurt. From our Southeast Bureau, check this out. You are looking at dinosaur tracks from more than 1 million years ago. Dinosaur Valley State Park in Texas said they discovered the new tracks because of the severe drought that dried up a river. That's amazing. These tracks had previously been underwater under layers of mud. So cool. Still ahead. Meghan Markle dropping a new podcast today. What she said, who she said it with, and why it's making waves when we come back. It is Meghan Markle's turn to talk, with the first episode of her highly anticipated podcast dropping today. And the topic? Ambition.
Say into every aspect of my life. This message to me and my classmates was clear. Our futures as young women were limitless. Ambition? Well, that was the whole point.
But she says her feelings around the word changed when she started dating Prince Harry. That's when she started, she says, to feel a negative connotation about ambitious women. So she's kicking off the podcast with a conversation with tennis great Serena Williams. They talked about everything, right from career to motherhood to Williams' announcement to leave tennis and pursue family life. Let's bring in Matt Bradley to talk this through with us. And Matt, I think the reason why this goes from just like an interesting story that everybody's talking about to actual news is because of the way that Markle casts shade on the royal family, frankly, and on the people that she and Harry have very famously separated from, removed from, moved thousands of miles away from, as it relates to her as a person and her as a mother.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and that's the entire reason why a lot of British people don't really seem to favor Meghan Markle. You know, they see this as another not being able to resist yet another opportunity to take a swipe at the royal family. And I think a lot of people here probably anticipate that in the next episode, where she's going to be speaking to Mariah Carey, that she's also going to use the opportunity to take another swipe at the royal family. So, you know, a lot of folks here, they see that as kind of just an American who's attacking a fairly sacred institution. So, you know, her candid talk, I'm not sure how well that went over here. I think for a lot of people who are fans of Meghan Markle, they'll always be fans of her, and this sort of thing, they love hearing it.
She does describe a story that we hadn't heard before about this fire. They were on this royal tour, and there was a fire in the nursery where her then newborn son was supposed to be sleeping. He happened to have been taken away sort of at that moment for, I think the nurse, the caregiver, the nanny basically wanted like a snack. So the baby was removed from the nursery. That's when the space heater caught fire. Very traumatic, Markle describes it, as she found out about it while she was out on this royal engagement. But then she just, as the way she puts it, Matt, she was then told to continue to go back out on the next royal engagement, right, at a time when she was feeling really shaken up. And she says that that really made her realize sort of what she was giving up by being a member of the royal family.
Right, and this was only a couple of months, this was back in 2019, only a couple of months before she and Prince Harry kind of stepped back from official royal duties. They've since kind of stepped back even further than that. But this was sort of a moment that was really evocative of a lot of the complaints that Meghan Markle has had about the royal family. And really, they echo quite a bit what we heard from Princess Diana, of course, Prince Harry's mother. And so, you know, she also described the wrenching experience of having to leave her children while dealing with her royal duties. So in a way, you know, either deliberately or just by dint of the job that she's doing, she's kind of sounding a lot like her mother-in-law, her late mother-in-law, who, of course, also experienced so many problems with the royal family, with the firm, as they call it here.
Matt Bradley live for us overseas in London. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Coming up, the new sights and sounds from outer space. What the inside of a black hole more than 200 million light years away sounds like after the break. Take a look at the newest pictures from outer space. NASA calling the images giant news from a giant planet. Stunning shots from Jupiter that you are about to see any second here, captured by the James Webb Telescope. They show storms, auroras on the north and south poles, and rings made of space dust. And then what about this? Listen. No, that is not the soundtrack to your nightmares. That's the sound of a black hole, specifically a black hole more than 200 million light years away from Earth in the Perseus galaxy. Paul Sutter, astrophysicist who knows a hell of a lot more about this kind of thing than I do, is joining us now. The black hole sound, Paul, so kind of interesting and eerie and cool. Like, what are we hearing?
Yeah, it's so cool. You've got this disk of gas that's thousands of light years across, and it has a giant black hole in its center that's beating on it like a drum and sending out these ripples. And these ripples are literally sound waves in that gas that take millions of years to reach from one end to the other. And we've mapped out these sound waves with X-rays and then converted that into sound so we can hear it. We had to scale it up by something like 57 octaves to put it in the range of human hearing, but that is what you are hearing.
Why do you think it's so interesting to people? Is it because, like, it is a tantalizing, somewhat tangible thing? You know, we can't touch it, we can hear it from the final frontier, if you will?
Yeah, exactly. We're so used to seeing astronomical images and seeing beautiful pictures, but space is alive. Space is dynamic. Black holes influence their host galaxies and vice versa. And to actually experience that with another sense is unsettling and also really cool.
The Jupiter pictures, right? Very cool here. I want to pull them back up here. But like everybody learned in school, big red spot, Jupiter red, you know? Why does it look blue then?
It looks blue because the James Webb Space Telescope doesn't see the universe the same way we do. We see invisible light, and the James Webb Space Telescope sees an infrared light, which is invisible to us. So to just look at the raw output of what the James Webb produces would be pretty boring because it'd be invisible. So we have to translate it, and we're free to choose any translation we want. We can pick any color scheme. And the scientists behind this translation chose blue, one, because it looks super awesome, and two, because this blue-white color scheme can really show off the contrast that's happening on Jupiter with the high cloud tops, with the aurora, with the rings, with everything going on with this amazingly beautiful planet.
How much of a game changer is it that we can see these kinds of images from the James Webb Telescope now? Like, how much are nerds geeking out about this? And I say that like in a loving way, like astrophysicist nerds who are just beyond brilliant. Like, I have to think this is so cool.
Yeah, we've waited for the James Webb for over a decade, and now that it's finally in position, it's finally taking data, it is really opening up new windows into our universe. It's giving us these unprecedented images of our home planets. It's giving us unprecedented images of the birth and death of stars, of the first galaxies to appear in the universe. It's like a new toy.
Paul Sutter, love having you on. Thank you so much. Very cool to be able to talk about this stuff here on the show. Appreciate it. That's a wrap for this hour. We'll have more for you here tomorrow. Same time, same place. Glad you're with us. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.